There's been a lot of talk about separating the art from the brother since Hulk Hogan passed away last week. One thing we know for sure though is that Terry Jean Belair was the greatest worker in the history of the business. Not from bell to bell, but from pen to contract. The way that things escalated from his original WCW deal to the last one he signed as part of the company after the New World Order had been a proven money spinner for going on 2 years was absolutely generational and should be studied, which is why we're here right now. When Hogan joined WCW in 1994, the New England Sports Network ran a story claiming that Hogan would get $600,000 or 40% for the company's gross revenue for every pay-per-view. For the standard of the day, you would think that's a bigger lie than Hogan himself saying he worked 370 days a year because of the time differences around the world, but no! Eric Bischoff himself said on his 83 Weeks podcast that the report was pretty close to what was signed, but ultimately, the reality was that Terry bagged himself what was essentially a flat fee for those first couple of WCW years. The Hulkster received $500,000 for 4 pay-per-view appearances each year. On top of that $500,000 for those 4 pay-per-view appearances, Terry would need to work 3 or 4 TV dates in the build-up to those pay-per-views and maybe a Clash of Champions here or there. So, $2 million a year in total for the stuff on television and inside the ring. When you think about that's without licensing and merchandise and all the extra stuff that WCW wasn't even involved in, the food stuff, the TV stuff, the movies, for 1994 or 1995 kind of times, wah, that was very nice indeed. From there we go to October of 1996, where according to the Wrestling Observer himself, and I know that in 2025 Dave gets a fair bit wrong, but in 1996 he was the belle of the ball for wrestling news. But back then, Dave said that Hogan had a 5-year, $5 million per year deal on the table from the WWF, mere months into the NWO's run. This would have seen Hogan, according to the report, return to TV for the WWF at the Royal Rumble of 1997, win the thing, and have a world title run as a heel come WrestleMania. Now imagine that, and imagine all of the things we did see that we wouldn't have seen because Hogan would have come back. It's absolute madness. However, that offer was obviously turned down, and Terry re-signed with WCW instead, although the exact terms of that deal are very hard to come by, and we can't even ask him now because he died. By the time Hogan was in a position to renegotiate that 1996 WCW deal, not only was the NWO in full swing and a proven success story for going on 2 years, but Vince McMahon was once again sniffing around the black and white bandana. Bruce Pritchard claims that towards the end of 1997, going into 1998, Hulk Hogan had agreed a deal to go back to the WWF with Hogan, and once again we need to caveat this, Bruce Pritchard has been known to exaggerate things from time to time, but back then Bruce claimed that Hogan would have been installed as the leader of D-Generation X in 1998. I mean, I don't doubt that Vince was sniffing around Hogan back then, but the leader of DX, you've got to question that, but also question what Bruce Pritchard was sniffing back then as well. Eric Bischoff, on the other hand, speaking to WSI this time, said he didn't know of the DX creative plans, but he did say that Nitro was taking place in Denver when these talks apparently took place, which according to Cage Match would have seen this particular night be of August the 11th, 1997, where Hogan wasn't even on the show because he was filming a movie in Montreal. Look at me autocue clicker we're seeing behind the camera now, which is addressed on the air by the NWO by saying, "We miss you, Hulk, we miss you, so enjoy your filming in America." They did a promo inside the ring. Anyway, according to Bischoff, Hogan told him he'd be meeting with Vince McMahon after the show because McMahon was in town. Hogan told Bischoff he was going to take the meeting, but he was going to rebuff any offer Vince McMahon might make him. The next morning, Hogan told Bischoff what was said and claimed the move back to WWF was never going to happen and it never got off the floor, and that meeting they actually had, in person by the way, was never about that kind of thing anyway. Now Bischoff, and we need to caveat this one again, who has been known to tell stories that make Eric Bischoff look as good as can possibly be, claimed that Hulk Hogan didn't ever use the meeting with McMahon as a bargaining tool for his 1998 contract negotiation. And personally, I think that is bollocks, because surely WCW did not have to give Hulk Hogan this amount of money that I'm about to go through right now if the WWF weren't even interested. It's madness. So, with that 1994/1995 $2 million a year for TV dates and pay-per-views in your mind, you'd assume that went up again in October of 1996 with the NWO getting off the floor. In 1998, WCW gave Hulk Hogan a one-off payment of $2 million just for signing a new deal with them. I can't even get out my mouth. It's that unbelievable. He picked up a pen, he pressed on a sheet of paper, and there's $2 million, Terry. Well done. They gave him his initial yearly in-ring TV wage, if you will, as a one-off bonus. But remember, this guy had no plans of leaving WCW and didn't use that Vince McMahon meeting as leverage for more money. Come on now, Bischoff, you can't be serious. This new contract and Hogan's last in WCW was going to run from May the 28th, 1998 until May the 29th, 2002. Now, there are obviously two big issues with that little time frame right there. Hogan all but left WCW and went home in the wake of Bash at the Beach 2000, just under 2 years before the deal was set to expire, and WCW as a company only lasted until March the 26th, 2001. Now, I'm sure the WWF would have been overjoyed when they had plans to re-debut Hulk Hogan, Scott Hall, and Kevin Nash at No Way Out on February the 17th, 2002, with no less than 101 days of that initial Hogan deal still to pay up. You'd imagine, you'd be furious, wouldn't you? But before we get on to the rest of the numbers, and bugger my bum, there are lots of numbers, Hogan's deal stated that he would have approval over the outcome of all wrestling matches in which he appeared. And that ended well for everyone in WCW who didn't have a single follicle of hair on the top of their head, who had the skin tone of my grandmother's mahogany dining table, and who had a whisker or two just above their top lip. Who weren't named Perry or Horace. I should say that the first names weren't Perry or Horace. I could have got to that little thing much quicker, but anyway. So this new 1998 to 2002 deal, 6 pay-per-views per year, where Terry would have to promote, appear, wrestle, and perform at Dive, Duck, Dip, Dive, and Money. Now, on those 6 pay-per-views per year, Hogan, as it states on the contract, was guaranteed to be the featured wrestler at each event. I mean, how sad and pathetic can you be while also being brilliant and cunning and king-like? Because he literally had WCW by the bollocks in terms of what we saw on television for 6 months out of 12 every single year, because he knew, come the pay-per-view, he was going to be the featured guy. He's genius. I mean, we should say this is all just years 1 to 3 of this new 4-year deal, so Christ knows what happens in year 4. He probably changes WCW's name to HHW, Hulk Hogan Wrestling. He never wrestles, but collects all the money owed to the wrestlers who do all the wrestling. You know what I'm saying? Then, it seems it was up to WCW to determine if Terry had been a good enough boy at the show he was on, whether he would get access to 15% of the total domestic pay-per-view cable sales, if they were over $675,000. If that 15% of the total pay-per-view cable sales was under $675,000, Terry got $675,000 per pay-per-view he appeared on anyway. So, $2 million just for putting pen to paper, plus $4.050 million at the very least. It could have been and probably was more from time to time at the end of the year just for appearing on pay-per-views. I have just pissed my pants. All that money for so little work. Love him or loathe him, the bloody brilliance of the man has been a horrible bastard at the contract negotiating table. It needs to be admired. I wish I had that bollocks. Then we have the pay-per-view buy rate bonus, which came on top of the cable sales bonus. It's a sliding scale, and look at those numbers, they look very juicy indeed. So, if a WCW pay-per-view that Hogan appeared on did over a 3.5 buy rate, Terry himself would receive an additional $1.75 million, and let's not forget, this is in 1998. That's $3.4 million in today's money. This never happened though. In fact, Terry only got access to this bonus scheme once under his new deal when Bash at the Beach 1998 did a 1.5 buy rate, meaning he walked away with a $250,000 bonus. But if this deal was in place for Starrcade 1997, which by the way did a 1.9 buy rate, Terry would have walked home with a $375,000 bonus. And you've got to think that Ted Turner and pals must have been praying for Hulk Hogan to be ill all of the time, so he missed pay-per-views and they could actually recoup a bit of what they made. Weekly TV now, where he was required to be at 16 mutually agreed television tapings in years 1, 2 and 3 of this new deal. Terry was contracted to appear on both Nitro and Thunder, just like that first deal back in 1994. However, this new deal saw him take home 25% of the gross arena revenues for each Nitro and Thunder he was on. However, if the 25% of the gross earnings fell below $25,000, WCW would just pay Terry $25,000 anyway. So if the gross was less than $100,000, Terry, in theory, should be due less than $25K, but would get $25K anyway. This makes as much sense as a Hulk Hogan's taint-flavoured lollipop, by the way. He got these bonuses monthly, you know, and if he wanted to, let's say his car broke down, he was like, oh, damn it, I'm Hulk Hogan, and I want a new Porsche. Let's go and buy the entire garage and all 365 cars they have in stock at any one time. He could appear on 4 Nitros in 1 month, 4 Thunders in 1 month, and do a pay-per-view that, let's say, did over a 1.5 buy rate, and he'd literally have more money than the follicles on that side of his head, that side of his head, the back of his head, and the front of his face. Remember though, he didn't mention that meeting with McMahon to get more money out of WCW according to Bischoff. WCW were just willing to throw this much money at him, whatever the weather. What's going on? Live events now, and Terry had to be on what WCW deemed as a reasonable number of non-televised house shows. I mean, if I was in charge, Terry would have been wrestling in every single match on the card and then being in the referee in the matches where he wasn't involved. Which is all of them. We're getting value for money here. It made sense in my head. Anyway, for these house shows, Terry got that same 25% of the gross ticket sales where he appeared and wrestled with no minimum payment attached this time. Hooray! They've seen sense! Wait there, there's a clause saying he has the final say on any international dates he's requested to be on for these live events. So he could say no, and there wasn't too much WCW could do about it. No wonder when 8-year-old Ross was going to the Telewest Arena in Newcastle upon Tyne, a WCW live event, Hulk Hogan wasn't on the card, and we know why now. Kwee-Wee was there though, and that's great. So you might have noticed that this deal has mentioned years 1 through 3 so far, and that's because Terry didn't have to wrestle if he was still in the company come year 4, but he'd still get a $100,000 consultancy fee. And if he did fancy wrestling still in year 4 of this deal, all of that stuff I've just talked about in the last few minutes there, that would become active again. But remember, WWF never came back for Hogan in 97, 98. WCW just wanted to give them this much money, which explains why WCW isn't around these days either. Merchandise now, and before I say what I'm about to say, remember Kevin Nash claims to have never seen a WCW merchandise check while he was in the company and actually sued WCW upon its closure in 2001. Hulk, though, he didn't need to stay within WCW's merch output for the stuff he was able to put his name on. As the contract reads, WCW acknowledges Belair retains the right to exploit his name, image, likeness, voice, and character, excluding trademarks in connection with non-wrestling related merchandising and licensing included, but not limited to, remember this, but not limited to, pasta restaurants, sandwiches, suntan oil, health drink mixers, vitamins and merchandises related to Belair's movies, television movies, and non-wrestling television appearances. Not limited is the crucial point here. He had the power to stick his name or likeness on anything any company was willing to have it on, and he would get lots of money for it. It's bloody genius stuff, and I hate to say that word, but it's true. And I say that because I get scared when I need a new pen here. But that's because I'm humble. Elsewhere in 1998, Hulk Hogan merchandise news, the guy got 50% of the net receipts received by WCW on all merchandise, and not only the stuff related to Hulk Hogan, Hollywood Hogan, or the Belair name or character. He also got 25% of all non-talent specific NWO related merchandise, such as the Ringmaster series that featured Chris Jericho dressed up as a lion tamer because of the finishing move name, Rick Steiner, he had a dog face grabbed on a leash, that kind of stuff. They were definitely not Hogan, but because the tweak was made in the likeness that we see on Nitro and Thunder each week, he got to keep the money. Genius again, I hate to say it. Anyway, it was noted in the death of WCW that Chris Jericho's fiancée purchased a Jericho and Dean Malenko WCW figure set. On the receipt, it apparently stated that Hogan and Sting was on the set, so obviously Hogan and Sting were getting a cut of that merchandise from that specific bundle. The profit margin that WCW should have been enjoying on the stuff their shows were advertising largely went into the back pocket of Hulk Hogan and Sting and other people who had that kind of deal. I don't care what you say, right, but it's admirable. I hate to say it again, but it is admirable. How the hell did he manage to wrangle this much money out of his career at this second peak? Never mind the first one, this is the second one. Shouldn't be as big in theory, but it was. $20,000 per month as long as he was wearing the NWO logo on his titties on television and in photo shoot. $20,000 a month for breathing, essentially, on top of the merch residuals, on top of the buy rate bonus, on top of the cable sales bonus, on top of everything else. If this wasn't already, we've now just crossed the territory into absolutely insane. What were WCW thinking? Oh, and there's that phone line thing, by the way, where people would call up for Nitro recaps or WCW rumors. You'd hear Mean Gene on the other end of the line going, "Oh wow, I've heard that Wrestler A saw Wrestler B on the toilet and they had a big poo. You go and tell Dave Meltzer, here's the huge scoop." It was a load of nonsense, really, but people still phoned in. It was the 90s, a crazy time. But if you called in during a pay-per-view, a wrestler might have been on the other end of the line and they could say things at you and you would go, "Oh, that's lovely. Thanks for the call, Raven." Anyway, if Hogan appeared on one of these calls, he got to keep 100% of the net revenue generated by hotline sales. Whatever the bollocks that means, I don't know. But Hogan keeping all of that and WCW keeping nothing just seems flat out wrong to me, even if the hotlines are not going to make too much in the grand scheme of things. Imagine if Cultaholic gave me all the revenue. I'd go from poor to poor. Now you might be wondering, what stuff did WCW do that might involve the Hogan likeness where he didn't get to keep a single penny? Well, when it came to anything relating to magazine or video cassette sales or any matches or other events sponsored by WCW where Hogan didn't appear, Hogan didn't get a penny. And it's absolutely fine. He already had too many pennies. Or so you would think. The bloke was raking in all this money, millions you would think, per quarter in 1998, but WCW still saw fit to give him $175 per diem to spend on sweets and drinks and crisps, either side of his contractually obligated dates. But to get to these dates, he had it written into his contract that he would need first-class air travel, a first-class hotel accommodation suite no less, and a private limousine for transportation. I honestly don't know how they expected him to get by without that per diem. I mean, if I was Hogan, I'd be taking that per diem and then saving it up so I could buy the whole pissing world. This man could have bought the whole world if he wanted to. So there we have it. Over the course of 4 years, Hulk Hogan went from getting $2 million per year from WCW to getting everything from WCW all the time. He was, as I said at the top of the video, the greatest worker in the history of the business, not from bell to bell, because when you read numbers like we've just read, who the hell cares about a tope con hello? But he was the greatest worker in terms of pen to contract. Ooh. It's horrible, but you've got to admire the Kavorka of Hulk Hogan. Goodbye, Hulk. You horribly brilliant bastard.